be talking to Dr. Duckworth from Gethsemane Missionary Baptist Church. Dr. Duckworth, we'll just jump right in. What made you start the addiction ministry at your church, and why do you feel it was necessary?
First of all, if we're going to be a church that is real, we have to be a church that will look among our community. And if there are segments of the community that have been left behind, that's where Jesus begins ministry to me. He said, I came to those that were sick, not to those that were well. And so we all have individuals in our families or in our friends or in our relationships that have been touched by addiction. And so it just made sense to have something to reach out because people come in and they're struggling. We all are dealing with something when we come to Christ, and it doesn't necessarily just magically go away just because we sign our name and give our tithes and offering. It doesn't happen that way. Oftentimes, it's a long process of recovery and a long process of healing. It can happen instantaneously, but most of the time, that's just not reality. And so, we had some individuals that was around the church that was honest and said, "Hey, Red, this is one of my struggles. It's something I'm dealing with." And so, matter of fact, one brother came up to me and said, this is my struggle. And I said, bro, if you hadn't told me, I would have never known. But when people are willing to be open and honest, then I just think at the end of the day, the church has to be uh, an element that reaches out. And I think we've done a bad job of receiving people and have done a better job at deflecting people away. And that's just not so. I think it's imperative that churches that are serious about ministry have ministries that will address those that are addicted inside the church as well as outside the church, because all folks addicted is not outside the church. You have some folks addicted to painkillers and other things that they are addicted to inside the church, and we look at them every week. And if we can only send them to hell, we're not doing ministry.
Wow, you are so right, Pastor. I guess that brings me to the next question. Um, why did you make the decision to expand the services of the ministry to include the Syringe service program? That is definitely a progressive decision as a pastor. Why did you do that?
Well, again, because the world of addiction is a lot stronger than a lot of us like to, and you could take one approach and say, well, you know what? Whatever happens to them because they shouldn't be engaged in this stuff anyway. That's an approach, a safe approach that a lot of people take. I just don't think it's an effective approach. That's like saying if you have young people or you have unmarried persons that are engaging in, sex and it's not protected, and you wait, and then if they come down with some disease, STI, HIV/AIDS, and then you chastise them, this is what you get, or do you just use logic and simply say, hey, this is plan A, which is always the best plan, but if you're not going to follow plan A, then you need to be wise in what you do. I remember when I was in seminary, there was a deacon church I was serving, and he used to always say, Reverend, be good. But then he said, but if you can't be good, be smart. And I never really understood I'm like, what are you trying to say? But what he was basically saying, do the best you can. But if you do find yourself falling, be smart about your fall. And so I just think that I wouldn't want to have to bury someone because they have infected themselves with a dirty syringe. I'm not encouraging them to use a syringe, but if they're going to be engaged in the addiction and at that moment, they're not themselves. And so if there are a safer way for them to, I mean, and it's no different than what's happening, with this the opiate and all that other kind of stuff. They're coming out with ways for them to be able to do it safer, and so it was a no-brainer again. The program is ran by those who know what they're doing, and I have no problem pushing back and saying, "Hey, if this is what you do it. I'll support you from the sidelines because everyone is just not gifted to do everything." people have special gifts and is particularly passionate. Whenever people are passionate about something, my motto has always been get out the way and let them go with their passion and just give direction and support. And so, yeah, I do realize that a lot of churches would not see it this way and would see as though I'm encouraging this kind of behavior, would be encouraging people to engage in that kind of thing. Not at all. People are doing it anyway. And so we want them to be safe, you know, bottom line.
Yes, wow, that's so profound, your words. I mean, that is exactly true. And it's really meeting the needs of people where they are. I think about the scripture, I became all things to all men, right? Grasping that concept, understanding that in those small acts of kindness and love, that's what leads people to Christ because they can see that light, not with us judging them and telling them what they should or should not be doing. So, all right. Last question, and thank you so much for your time. Why would you recommend? Now, you've said it in many different ways,
Mhm.
but we're going to close in here with why would you recommend to a pastor to institute this type of ministry at the church? Just talk directly to our pastors.
Well, I think one, as pastors, we have to realize that we don't have all the tools. And if there's any one soul that could be reached or touched because of this program that's reaching people, because really it's another avenue to evangelism. I mean, I'm always looking at what ways can we reach individuals. One thing about this pandemic, it forced many of us, of pastors, to leave our padded pews and carpeted floors. And now we've really discovering what we all about. And unfortunately, if we wasn't about nothing inside, we ain't about nothing outside. But if we were about something inside, then we are something about outside because now we have a bigger audience. And I think one of the things that can actually happen is that even through a program like this that may seem, a little bit too progressive, a little bit too out there, I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to reach individuals who may be lost. And if this program is dealing with people showing love and care to the person, because the reality is you cannot win someone over to Christ until you win over them to you as being you respecting them and seeing them as a person with a soul. And so I just think that I stand a better chance of winning a person to Christ when I have at least made that person feel as though I view them and value them as a person and not an object, but as an actual human being. And so I would recommend to any pastor that if you're serious about ministry, um, and if you're unsure, because I understand, you may get backlash. And one of the things I've always said, ministry is not for the faint of heart. If you scary, then you just stand in four walls. And right now during this pandemic, I don't know how that go, how would that go for you? But at the end of the day, ministry is risky. True ministry is risky. No ministry that has ever made any impact has ever been safe.
Yeah.
You're going to get your head cut off. You're going to be between horses and have them try to divide you in different ways. You're going to be put into kettles of hot boiling oil. Ministry is not safe, but Christ has already given you the guarantee that if he said, "Lo, if you go, I'm with you." Not if you stay. He said, "Lo, if you go, I'm with you." And
Yeah.
so, if you want the covering of Christ, ministry is not safe. It's risky, and at the end of the day, it should always be focused on trying to help someone. If people can be helped, then there's definitely a possibility they can be saved. And so I just think this is another avenue. I remember when I was in seminary and there was a conversation about a bar ministry. And I laughed and I thought that the people that was talking about that stuff was out their mind. I'm like, I know bar ministry, people in the bar. But then someone said, think about it. Why do most people go to bars? And oftentimes the bartender hears more about people's personal lives and they're not trained for that. But people divulge that information. Now, what if we had some Christians strategically placed around the bar that when that person is sharing, they could step in and begin to meet them where they are? We're so concerned about being in the wrong place. There was never a wrong place for Christ. I
Yes.
don't know whose Bible people read, but there was never a wrong place. Christ, what you doing there? Jesus, what you doing there? Hold on. You know, woman at the well, you shouldn't be talking to her. Hold on. You know, uh, just because you in the church don't make you sanctified and holy. Trust me. And just because I was to go to a crack house to try to pull someone out does not make me a crack addict. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have to be intentional. Now, if you got a drinking problem and all that, then you don't go to the bar. But if that's not an issue and you can understand what goes on in those dynamics, I think it's a wonderful place to be. So that would be my recommendation as to why a person would consider using the SSP program and allowing this program to help the church look at people differently.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Duckworth. You said so much here, but I think what you said also can be exemplified in the ministry of the church prior to COVID. And I think you said that, this is something that I would call Gethsemane a hallmark of being in the community and trying to meet the needs of the people. So we just thank you again for your willingness to partner and to run this program. We're excited about the ordinance being passed. And so
Amen.
we
Amen.
are just ready to go. So thank you so much, Dr. Duckworth.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bless you.
Faith and harm reduction, the true meaning of all God's children. SOAR promotes harm reduction by distributing naloxone and other harm reduction supplies. We do this through peer-led programs, advocating for syringe access expansion, and equitable drug policy reform. We also organize to build power among groups who experience the greatest inequities. The role of faith in substance use treatment ranges from minimal to pervasive. For some, underlying religious principles provide a backdrop for traditional psychological approaches to treatment, such as behavior management and other therapies. In these cases, spiritual principles come to the foreground sporadically. Therefore, the faith community must be prepared to handle an influx of congregants and community members whose reliance upon faith is an integral part of their substance use journey. SOAR's goal is to strengthen support for harm reduction messages, principles, and practices that uphold the divinity and dignity of people who use drugs, and which strengthen spiritual resources, health, and well-being for communities that are being affected by the overdose crisis. Our purpose is to build a network of faith leaders advancing responses to the overdose crisis that are rooted and grounded in compassion, dignity, and justice. Center the leadership and wisdom around people with lived experience, particularly among communities of color. Advocate for spiritual and theological approaches to address the opioid crisis and other harms of radicalized drug policy. Support public policies to expand harm reduction and other community-led health and wellness opportunities for people who use drugs. Challenge the root causes that increase vulnerability to drug-related harm. For God so loved the world, and we are mandated to do the same. So what will you give? We're not asking you to give your life. We're asking you to give the same kind of love that you received from God. That same kind of love that saved your life. And even though what we see to our natural eye may appear as bad, we have to understand God's promise to work everything out for our good. Will you join us? Will you see good? Will you stand with us in this faith and harm reduction program? Will we be a church that loves all despite of who they are or what they're involved in? A church that seeks to save the lost and dying? A church that is called to rescue the perishing? A church that believes God loves each one of us so much that He would work towards reducing harm through our lives. If this is you, if this is your church, the Faith and Harm Reduction Program is designed for you. If you want to be a part of this program, please contact SOAR at 734-697-9511 or email strategictransitions@hotmail.com.